Totally love it. Well, let's get started because I want to get into just the range of ideas out there. So the first part of this will be a little bit more lecture, I guess, just to give you some background. And then towards the end, we'll have this chart just to give you a preview of what we'll do here is work out how we use synchronous versus asynchronous, and I'll define those in a second, and then kind of do pros and cons. Because as I've been reading about the different approaches, it occurred to me that, this is not really about right and wrong. It's never like, oh, well, synchronous like Zoom is always better, or asynchronous doing a discussion board in Canvas is better or worse. A lot of it is based on style, and again, I thank Solange and also Amber Golagowski who represented in Tuesday's talk on managing work and life, managing a home and working at home. We talked so much about office hours, and it occurred to me once we got into that discussion about office hours, there isn't a right and wrong way to approach office hours. If you're doing them, it's your decision. Do you do them at, late at night or on a weekend, or what's your best approach? Do you approach it tactically with a specific concept, or do you just make it wide open? Do you meet one-on-one or get groups of students? So one of the things we can all learn and appreciate from this is the idea that it's not about right and wrong, it's about different applications, and it's best that we learn what's available and then see how we want to use the tools. So that's kind of my first tip today, is to say, it's about different approaches, not right and wrong approaches. I want to mention next week, no workshops. I'm on a accreditation visiting team, and accreditation refers to the process that we go and make sure that colleges are doing the things they need to do to get reaffirmed by the federal government, Department of Education. And this year we're doing it virtually, but our assignments are equally as intense as they were doing a face-to-face visit. So my Monday, for example, I'm busy from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Zooming. So I'm not going to be much of a human being next week, so you probably wouldn't want to talk to me. So no workshops. I will send out some updated videos on Monday, including likely this video. So hopefully if you say anything in this video, just make sure it's ready for prime time, because this is one of those I do want to share with faculty who couldn't attend. I'm also presenting a video I just rendered today on Name Coach. Name Coach is a really cool application in Canvas available in the settings menu, and I will walk you through how to use Name Coach. What Name Coach is essentially is you and your students record their names, and this way you can better pronounce your students' names and they can pronounce your names. And so look out for that next week. And again, no workshops. We'll be back in the normal schedule the following week. So sorry about that, but I have to also get caught up on my ASP grading, which is coming in, and I'm kind of at that moment where I'm pulling my hair out a little bit trying to get everything done, probably as you are, because we're in midterms. So if you would like any of this information, let me, as it comes up here, I'll put it in the chat room. I sent this also out on an email last night, the exact same links. If you have that email, you're fine. So today we're talking about synchronous versus asynchronous, and they're very simple to remember. So synchronous means happening at the same time. So right now we're doing a form of synchronous learning or conversation. We're meeting in real time, and the advantage, we'll get into advantages and disadvantages, but one clear advantage is if something isn't clear, one of you wants to ask a question to me, I can immediately jump in and say, well, that's what this means. Same with your students. If you're teaching your students Photoshop or video editing or whatever, and you're doing this in real time in the synchronous format, and a student says, well, Solange, wait, I don't understand. Can you go back? What was the thing about layers? And you can spend 10 minutes with that, and then you discover that 10 minutes spent in real time is worth maybe weeks of effort because that student gets it at that moment. Whereas I record this video like today, I share it with YouTube with our colleagues, but then if someone has a question for me, they can't ask me in real time. They would have to email me, call me up, text me, whatever, and I could set up an appointment with them. So there are pros and cons to each of these, but what we're doing today is what's called synchronous learning. It's happening at the same time. We're all meeting at the exact same time. And this is irrespective of time zone differences, although it gets interesting. Years ago, I was doing an interview with a journalist from India, and he said, oh, our time difference is 8 hours and 15 minutes. And I got into this kind of, wait, how does it even work? How can, time zone be different by 15 minutes? But it's indeed the case. And so we can, of course, sync our clocks. And we're doing a lot of this. Our new full-time faculty member in sociology is still moving from the East Coast. We have other people that work for us who live in wherever, Washington State, and we sometimes do have to adapt our time zones, but we can do that. As long as we sync our calendars, we can still meet simultaneously. It's very hard. The accreditation team I'm serving on, one of our faculty members is from Hawaii, and we had an 8 a.m. meeting, so for her that was what, 3 hours earlier, 5 a.m., so pretty harsh. But the point is there's a value of meeting at the same time because we can have a sense of a collaboration, we can have better dialogue, and we can answer questions, give feedback as presenters. So obviously the opposite of that, or the different version, is called asynchronous learning, and the instructor doesn't participate in real time with the learners, with the students. So many examples of this. An example would be I record this YouTube video, I share it with students or learners after the fact, and then they hear it later. They're not hearing it at the exact same time that I'm recording it. Any of you that have done live sound applications, I can't tell you how many bands I've been in where I was in one band once and we were running all our music tracks off a really old Mac, one of those old, I forget what they were called. They looked like this, like fish bowls. They had, black and white screens. And I kid you not, in the middle of our performance, the Mac just crashed and we had to reboot it. In those days, rebooting a computer took a few minutes. So we had to literally fill the time and improvise in between because our backing tracks were all based in a Mac that had just crashed. And so real time, like if you saw any of those real time Jesus Christ Superstar, I mean, really noble production efforts on NBC. But Solange and Eric, both of you coming from audio backgrounds, they had major audio issues with miking and mixing, and it's kind of a nightmare sometimes. And that's why sometimes if you go to live shows where they get it right, where there's live musicians like a Cirque show in Vegas, it's truly amazing to see what they can pull off with the clarity, the mixing, and just the fact that things don't go wrong. So having a live version of anything, whether it's music, a performance, a class, there are a lot of what ifs. There are a lot of uncertainties. If our power goes out, some of you have been on sessions with me where my Zoom crashed and I had to reboot the computer and you had to wait and come back in. Live is not always your best bet. If you're a perfectionist, if you want to edit something, if you're trying to do a workshop on how to use a video editing program and you want to get that perfect, you might want to do it asynchronous because you want to really carefully think through what you're trying to say. And sometimes just in that process, like in recording this video I was doing today on Name Coach, someone texted me and said, oh, did you attend that workshop on gender pronouns from the Guided Pathways conference? And I'm like, oh, that's right. I got to add that. So I did another voiceover and, downloaded my WAV file, put that over my slides and so forth. So it's an iterative process, sometimes doing these trainings, doing any video. If I'm doing a video for all of you, or if I'm doing a music tutorial video on my YouTube channel, I will forget things, even though I lay things out with an outline and a PowerPoint. And because I'm not doing it live, I can go back and edit and redo it, do another take and so forth. So there's a definite advantage to doing asynchronous if you're a perfectionist and if you don't want to spend the time mapping everything out perfectly and then hoping, crossing your fingers, nothing goes wrong live. Now, that being said, the stakes of teaching a class, as important as they are not the same as doing Jesus Christ Superstar live for NBC television. If you watch any of the debates, if you watched technical glitches that happen with both conventions of the political parties, things will happen, and sometimes people are forgiving. I think generally with our classes, our students understand technology issues, and sometimes they have those issues. So I think if we apply grace, as Amber talked about in our workshop on Tuesday, for ourselves, and if our students apply that to us, we'll probably be in good shape. But those are the two main approaches. Does that definition, is that clear to you? Do you understand what we mean? And we're going to get into it in a second here, all the different approaches from Zoom to Gradebook to Canvas discussions and announcements and all the tools that we can use for both types of learning. But does that make sense what asynchronous versus synchronous is?
It does make sense. It makes total sense,
Okay,
the
cool.
differences. And
Great.
I have both types of classes.
Good. I have too. And again, I really think we have to get out of this. I've been trying to say this for years. Before many of us were teaching online, when we were still face to face, people would always say online isn't good, And I hear today sometimes people say synchronous is better than asynchronous, or vice versa. And I say they're different. One is not better than another. We're all different instructors. We're all different learners as students and as colleagues. So I just found this. This was another edit I did kind of last minute because I was remembering I found this on social media. And there's been this whole push in many disciplines over recent years talking about 2.0, Museum 2.0, Web 2.0. The idea behind 2.0 is trying to make whatever it is that you're doing, like if it's a museum, you want to make it more interactive. A lot of old school museums have been based on principles of you put up a diorama, a plaque on the wall, and it's a very passive form of learning or interaction of the museum guest and those who put together the exhibit. Museums have shifted to a more 2.0 model where they say, we want people to give feedback. So if we're showing an exhibit at the Monterey Aquarium about the effect of pollution on wildlife, let's allow people through social media or an app or a little portal that they can type into, give their input about how they can make a difference in helping the environment. So the 2.0 movement is trying to make everything more interactive in terms of how people use the particular tools. So in the case of Zoom, there are a lot of learners out there, educators who really are interested in Zoom getting better. And I think Zoom is making an effort to get better, but still it may not be the best tool, say, for educators. There are some tips here. And some of these tips are saying, practice being on video, record yourself time and time again. I know both Eric, Solange, and myself, we do video and audio and edits. And so, but not everybody is comfortable with that. So if you're not comfortable with that, we can have some conversations offline about how to just think about video. You don't have to necessarily get super fancy and have, video lights or multiple cameras or whatever, but you could just think about how to make eye contact and how to have presence on your screen. If you're doing a pre-recorded video, or even if you're doing, obviously, a synchronous video on Zoom. Reflect on activities in your class, pause and try to make moments of silence. I struggle with this. I talk very fast. I know that. Someone recently emailed me and said, Scott, you talk too fast. And I said, I know. We all have our challenges. The third is keep students engaged by building lesson plan around 5-minute increments. This is really key with Zoom because of Zoom fatigue. I am really scared, if you will, about my week next week doing 4 days in a row of Zooming on my accreditation visit. I have a block going from 8 to 2 without even a bathroom break. So I'm going to inquire how we're going to make that happen, because obviously we all have just needs to take a break and to stretch and to go to the bathroom and, make a cup of tea or whatever. So taking breaks and using breakout rooms during a live Zoom session can be very effective. I'm guilty of not doing a lot of breakout rooms, but whatever you can do to build interest and to take those breaks is great. And then the last tip is make time for breakout sessions, because it allows the instruction to move from you and the class to groups of students, and you can pop in the various breakout rooms. So I show you this article because the whole idea of moving towards a 2.0 Zoom is to say, can we improve upon the interaction and the quality of what happens in a live Zoom session? And I'll let you know what happens. I'm in this current beta testing group. I still haven't gotten the beta for it, but it will allow supposedly better use of educational tools in a Zoom environment. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers on that will make a difference. So I sent this chart out, and it's just my way. I operate a lot through charts and sort of these thought pictures, as one of my old and late anthropology advisors called them. And a thought picture is just a way of trying to see something. So I was sitting down last night, and I was actually, last 3 days, I got 3 loads of vaccines, and I was pretty under the weather. I was barely moving from the getting knocked out by a variety of vaccines. But anyway, I was on the couch and I was kind of jotting down my diagram, and this is what it became in OmniGraffle. And the 2 axes here on the chart, what I'm trying to look at is the difference between synchronous instruction and asynchronous instruction or technology. Again, synchronous in real time, asynchronous a time distance, a temporal distance. And so on the chart here, this is near and far. And you can think, obviously, if you're doing Zoom, it is super close in time to what you're doing at that point. So is Proctorio. Proctorio is a way of making sure that students don't cheat, and the whole point of that working is it happens in real time. Now, curiously enough, I'm getting emails from quite a few faculty saying they're worried about Proctorio. They think it's an invasion of privacy. It's Big Brother. It's kind of more of the Cambridge Analytica invading our lives. So I said, let's have a conversation. Let's engage the college administration and talk about privacy, because I agree, we shouldn't just assume that because it exists, we have to use it. But it is a real-time tool. Cranium Cafe, the tool that our counselors and tutors use to work with our students, is also real-time. So on this particular axis, I have the time distance, and a lot of things are clumped here because they really happen pretty near in time or pretty far. Labster, YouTube, Canvas discussions, a student can choose to do a lot of those whenever he or she wants, and as a result, the time between interactions, the time between when you post it as an instructor and they respond, can be anywhere from an hour to a week, depending on your deadlines. Now, some other apps out there, something like Marco Polo, it's a pretty popular social media app. It's something our foreign language, world languages instructors use. It's not quite as temporally far as something like YouTube. And the reason for that is you take your phone, you record a video message, and then someone else, and you can use this with friends, they record a video message. And even though it's not happening in real time, because it's video and because of the interface of that app called Marco Polo, which is free to use, it feels a little closer to me. It feels like it's more intimate. And that kind of leads to the other axis here, and that's whether something is immersive or not. The definition of immersion, just kind of based on some of my work in the theme park industry, is what I call deep involvement. And if you're curious, you can look at some of my work in my book, or this particular piece I did years ago for the attractions industry on why immersion matters, and really trying to talk about, from an anthropological perspective, how anthropologists, to understand a culture, try to enter that culture, learn their language, learn their culture, because they really want deep involvement so they don't have a false picture of how that culture works. And so that's what we mean by immersion. It's the etymology, the meaning of it comes from dipping your hand in water. If you dip your hand in water, you feel whether it's cool or hot. So that's a sense of its immediacy. You feel like you're engaged or interactive in that activity. So the other axis is between immersive and non-immersive. So a very high immersive activity, I think, would be Zoom. Now, at this moment in time, because I said, albeit I'm going to be talking, you're not interacting, you're still engaged. Hopefully you're still there, you're listening, and I'm listening to you. But there are other examples of technologies out there. I don't know your opinion, but when I use Canvas text chat, I don't feel like it's very good either. It's not synchronous. And again, synchronous is not good or bad, but it doesn't feel very interactive to me because you're just typing. It's like in the old days, I'm dating myself, but I used to play the old video games like Zork. And Zork was a game that had no graphics. It was all very simple machine learning, and you were in a castle and there was a monster, and you would type something and it would give you a text description of what happened. A monster is coming your way, and then you had some choices and you would type what to do. So it was very primitive using today's video game standards in terms of audio and video and machine learning and language that's running all the simulations in the video game. But it doesn't mean it's bad, but for me, I would put Canvas text chat. It's not obviously synchronous, and I would put it very low in this quadrant because I don't really feel like it's that engaging. Yes, you can ask a question, but text chat is maybe not as great as someone asking you as an instructor to describe something in a more real time setting, or give me a video tutorial. So this axis would go from low to high. And you notice up here, I have something like VR headsets. I've sort of thrown this idea out there. Have we thought about using something like Google Glasses or VR headsets? Because actually, using VR headsets would be even more interactive and potentially immersive than doing Zoom. And let me show you one example of that. A brief trip here to a place called The Void. And I had a chance to experience The Void in Las Vegas before COVID shut everything down. So I'll just play a really quick trailer. It's very interesting in my mind. Very quick. But what's cool about the Void, and let me just turn off the sound. There are different versions of the Void. Let me just pause it. Okay, so I'm going to try to do that again. I'm trying to show you. So you see there's a reality that the player is seeing. But in what happens is you wear a whole VR headset and you wear audio. It's like three-dimensional, great audiophiles out there will appreciate incredible audio, spatial audio. So things are coming around you. So if a monster's behind you, right, the audio presence is behind you. You experience that. You're actually walking around during this, and I've done some lower tech versions of this with VR glasses and even video game shooting stuff. I did a Walking Dead one that lasted all of, I think, 4 months in Las Vegas and closed rather suddenly. That wasn't nearly as good as the Void. So what makes the Void so different is you're walking in a three-dimensional space, and it kind of is one of those tricks that video game designers play with, the old video game designers, called 2.5 space. It's a way to do sort of 3 points of perspective in space, here, here, and here, and then make some subtle adjustments to each layer, and then you create this three-dimensional effect. And it's actually, you can do it using Blender, freely available tools. But what's cool about this is they use a similar technique. So they create a circular space that's not that big. You walk sort of in a circle, but you don't realize you're walking in a circle because you're getting all the projections and all the audio. You're getting visual projections on your glasses in real time, and you're getting the audio. And this is showing you someone's touching a panel. And I did it a couple times. I took my headset off and I looked at, it was a Star Wars thing, so they had R2-D2. And R2-D2 in the real space was a gray just hump or lump of metal or plaster. But when you wear the glasses, you can touch R2, you get the tactile haptic sensation of touching R2, but you're seeing something totally different than what you're touching or what you'd see if you took your glasses off. So for me, doing the Void was an absolute mind-blowing experience from Immersion because you really felt like you were in that space. So to go back to the point about using VR glasses, it may not be practical for us to do it, but using VR glasses and creating a reality, a learning reality where you could interact with things. There's a new, all my examples are music and audio. Sorry, that's kind of my world, a lot of my world. But there's a new form of virtual or modular synthesis coming out, which I will never give up my patch cables and my modules, but it's actually going to involve virtual glasses. So you're going to put the glasses on, you're going to be touching stuff, and then you're going to have virtual patch cables and virtual modules. And for people who don't want to spend thousands on a modular setup because it's expensive, they could do it virtually. And I'll be curious to see this because maybe for $40 for a piece of software and for another 30 or $40 for some glasses, it could replicate the experience of learning or doing modular synthesis. And in these times, we could certainly think about in culinary, even in other fields out there where maybe it's a lot of expensive equipment, like in nursing, maybe some of the virtual versions of this could potentially be an option. Losing my voice a little bit. So anyone have any ideas about that? Could you ever see going to like a virtual reality for teaching any of the concepts in your fields?
I see VR as our future. I think it's going to definitely become a tool for learning.
Yeah. I would like to see it happen now, frankly. And I sent out, maybe I'll try to send out some more feelers, but I looked into it, and the Google, it's not a Google version, or there may be one, but the cardboard VR glasses they're like $7 to $10 that you stick your phone in. You know, that's not bad. And then you can get a decent pair of headphones. And those of you who know audio, right, you don't need a lot of special technology on your end to do really impressive spatial audio. There's so many cool interactive horror video games coming out now and online experiences because of Halloween going virtual that will really scare the hell out of you just with sound and a little bit of video. Because sound, with movie scoring, Hitchcock, I mean, think about Bernard Herrmann and some of the stuff he did with his soundtracks and just what he did with really making the orchestra the way he did in those Hitchcock films. And I say this because I just spent kind of a big bundle on a Bernard Herrmann composer's toolkit from Spitfire. And it's amazing what you can do with the spatial aspects of the sound with the microphone positions. And I think it's an example with audio and movies. You take that audio out, you take the sound effects out, the Foley stuff. More than half of the movie is gone in terms of the thrill, whether it's a shock, a sensation, or whatever. And obviously, Solange, you've won awards on this, so I mean, it's doable, right, to do some of this with VR and audio.
Absolutely. I definitely see it in our future that this will become a teaching tool. I think right now it's too expensive and the investment is too severe right now.
Yeah.
I think it'll become more commonplace, like video games. VR will become more common and more doable and more affordable as time goes on. Maybe not in my lifetime, but definitely not too far in the future.
I'm challenged to consider how to apply it to economics, but to public speaking, it could be interesting to put students up on a stage in front of hundreds of people delivering a speech.
There you go.
That might be an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
Oh, Eric, there's I haven't tried it, but there's this growing trend. It's called virtual comedy. And you sign up, I guess you pay a ticket admission price, and you are on screen with the comedian. So the idea is it's supposed to put pressure on the comedian to have an audience, and then you sort of have the pressure because some stand-up, my wife and I used to go to this great comedy club in SoCal when she was at UC Riverside, and some of the comedians would put you on the spot, and you were like, oh, darn, I sat, in the front stage, and now I'm getting called out. So virtual comedy, I think, is an example of how, like in a speech class, you can learn from being not in a high pressure setting, but in a more pressure setting than just speaking to your camera on a screen or something like that. So very, very cool idea.
They could be giving their speech to hecklers.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. You maybe want to invite the right people. I don't know how you decide on that.
Think that VR would be able to be used like in a classroom situation where I can see my students and they can see me and we can interact. Do you think that kind of technology will exist?
It exists. And I actually, after doing this, I think I'm going to be inspired maybe when my accreditation is done to maybe look into this, to play around with some of it. If we could find an app that would maybe be freely available, and then if the glasses were, we would need students to have a phone, so we would have to do an assessment, and then maybe for students who didn't have a phone, we could buy a phone just for the purpose of doing that, a very stripped down version of a phone. I think it would be possible, but we'd have to really think about it through cohorts. Like in a particular class, what are you trying to teach? And then what app would work best for that, creating a virtual environment. And then if we have the phone, could we get the very simple cardboard glasses that the phone clips into? Because those are literally like $7 on Amazon or eBay. So I think it's possible. There's a little bit of learning, and there's also desire to do some of this as well. But for me, I'll never be the same after doing The Void. I just thought, this is not really happening. When I was walking through space and it was a stormtrooper thing I actually wanted to do, there was one on the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, and it wasn't playing on that day, so I did the Star Wars. But it was amazing. You're looking behind you, and then you can feel the walls, and you have an actual, blaster, and you're shooting at these beings that are like three-dimensionally appearing to be in different spaces. It's truly amazing. And to apply that game fun to a classroom setting, I think would really be amazing. So I think we should investigate it for sure. Why not?
On a deeper philosophical level, there's something that bugs me about the whole idea that people are going to be getting more gratification in virtual realms than in real life. I've already seen that with how kids can get so immersed in video games that they don't want to come back, to real life. Yep. I had a woman I know whose son was in World of
Warcraft
for 3 years in his bedroom. She couldn't pull him out.
Wow. Yeah.
Luckily, he was a genius who managed to just absorb his math classes and was kind of a savant in that regard, and finally transitioned. But she lost him for 3 years inside of virtual realms that weren't even as graphic as what we could eventually experience in 3D. It's a little bit scary to me.
It is. It is. Yeah, moderation. It's interesting because someone like Jane McGonigal, who's done TED Talks on video games, wrote this really influential book years back, Reality is Broken. And her whole idea was to take that excitement of that student you mentioned, that young person, and channel it in productive ways. So what McGonigal is getting at in her work and many others is a whole arena of what's called serious gaming. Serious gaming uses the excitement of video games, the immersion, the fun, the shooting stuff, but it directs it at real problems. So instead of maybe just shooting people in a Star Wars game, you're maybe part of a meeting dealing with environmental issues, trying to focus on, in the vice president debate last night, all this discussion about fracking and and it's interesting, these arguments about, environmental issues and policy. Well, if more people knew more about fracking or the various climate issues that we're dealing with, renewable energy and so forth, climate change with the deforestation and fires and hurricanes, one way to educate people would be to have more games that have a bit of fun. So maybe it's 70%, if it's normally 100% fun or 99% fun and 1% concept or content or even learning, shift that a little bit to 70% about the actual issue, learning about environmentalism, and 30% is the fun. The cynics out there will say, well, no, this doesn't work because most of the, quote, serious games aren't that fun to play. They're more focused on education. They're using, like what we're talking about, virtual reality to teach a key concept. So Eric, your concern is profound. I mean, it's so important because video games, certainly you look at South Korea, a culture that has had deep conversations about the amount of time kids spend on video games all across the world, including the US. Social media and the time spent on screens has led to young boys and girls developing eating disorders and suicide, hazing of LGBTQ youth because of social media. So believe me, these technologies are not an end all. But if we channel some of that fun, immersiveness into something more serious, learning one of our disciplines or skills or content areas, there's a possibility. But yeah, it's not a solution. I'm not saying we should all become virtual, although there are days where we want to just, flip on, Netflix and watch an entire queue of a show because we don't want to have to think about some of the talking heads on TV and so forth. And I just saw that Trump pulled out of the virtual debate for next week. And I saw that today. I almost wanted to put a slide in, but I thought this is interesting. So it's okay for most colleges and universities, nationwide to be teaching virtually, but the president is too good to do a debate virtually. What's the difference? Anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but Eric,
there's not going to be a debate, or
I don't know. The last hour I read, they said it's up in the air, but
Biden said that he feels that Trump doesn't have the right to change the debate on his time. And so Biden is planning on being at the debates. And if Trump isn't there, then Biden's going to do a town hall type, take questions and give answers. So Biden's going to be available no matter if it's a debate or a town hall meeting. He will be available.
Interesting. Okay. It would be interesting to see the debate while they're in their avatars.
Yeah. Speaking of avatars, I know this group, so I can. Have you seen this goofy? I'm going to do this, and I'll embarrass myself, but or will it let me do it? Oh yeah, it's under preferences. I need to do a video on this, but recently there's been an update to Zoom and kind of worthless features, but they have brand new backgrounds and filters. So some of these are some of the video filters actually are not bad because you can do like a different look. It's probably not going to let me do it in real time. It's not. Oh yeah, it actually is. Okay. It's sepia. Do you see the change in my?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you could do glasses.
Oh, now you're looking cool.
Completely worthless. See this kind of thing. I don't know. So they have that. And then I actually kind of like.
You the same again after the bunny ears.
And then these are, don't check this, apply to future meetings, but you can give yourself eyebrows. You can adjust the color, mustache, beard. It seems very gendered. I mean, I don't know, facial hair, right? I mean, women can have facial hair, but you can change your lip color if you want. It's
Ooh,
Like
smashing.
Anderson Cooper, his lip color, whoever does his makeup made him look like a girl during the presidential debates. He looked
oh really? I didn't notice that. I always notice Trump, but anyway. So this, I was saying the other day actually that I I wish they would do this, but make it more educationally relevant. And I'm thinking they're trying to appeal here to the Facebook crowd, maybe the kids who want to do that because it's so popular with younger people. But the Instagram crowd, I just don't find it that interesting for educators. But again, who's their audience? So
Yeah, if you had an Albert Einstein mask, that'd be awesome.
something.
Audio for years where I can sing a song, but I can choose like Paul McCartney or
yeah, that's out now.
Perry or whoever I want to sound like.
In the movie,
Oh, there is.
we're doing that with actors where they can get a day player and have them recite dialogue with the actor's voice.
So check this out. I'm sorry, I'm just going to geek out about audio. I don't care. This is a new plugin that makes you sound all your songs sound like Drake, right? So I want to make my songs sound like Robert Fripp. Where's that plugin? I don't know, but it's only.
Robert Fripp guy.
Oh yeah.
We need to get together, man. If you're into Robert Fripp.
Oh my God, I'm a King Crimson nut. But anyway, nothing against Drake. But you could for $50, all your songs will sound like. And then Solange, you're going to be out of business. They're not going to want you to mix anything. Totally off the subject, but the whole AI thing that's coming up with machine learning. I was watching a podcast the other day, and a lot of audio engineers, even composers, they're scared because they said the next generation of Spotify could be not just the songs you like, but machine learning will on the fly or a little bit ahead of time, create a song that sounds like Drake or sounds like Usher, or whatever group or artist, but isn't. And then it's like, what exactly is copyright? And I know the songwriters will go nuts and say, well, wait a second, you're going to kill us by eliminating our ability to write songs because you're going to have machines that will write our style of music. And that's a scary world.
Songwriters have been doing for years.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So that's scary. I know we're going to audio world, but it's all relevant because I think there's a side of this. One of the advantages that we can talk about with doing asynchronous is like with Canvas, it can grade your multiple choice exams. And I think it's perfectly fine. I've used it a million times. Scary thing is about 5 years ago, I was reading articles about both people in sort of underdeveloped countries being paid a very poor wage there would be contracting out with these firms somewhere in India or Bangladesh, very exploitative labor situation, and they would grade essays for the professors. Or you would, over time, teach machines to figure out how to grade essays. And so a scary side of asynchronous learning would be if that happened, if we're no longer grading anything, right? I think there's a value to having the flexibility in our lives and our time to allow Canvas to grade. But hopefully we follow up on that grading and not just leave everything to Canvas like a robot or something like that. And just to finish up this chart, that leads to this idea of the application. I don't care what technologies you use, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous. If you have discussion boards where there isn't a lot of feedback that you're giving, is that really a discussion board? Or if you have a poorly designed course with no modules and students don't know how to get from point A to B, that's never going to be good whether you're using more asynchronous approaches like discussion boards or announcements or more synchronous ones like Zoom. Likewise, you log on to Zoom and you don't have an outline, even on a piece of paper, something to go off of or a PowerPoint on the screen, and you're just kind of BSing. That's great, but students might be like, hey, why, to go back to Solange's point on Tuesday, why should I come to my office hours? Well, if the office hours are worthless, if you don't have a structure, if you don't have good content with anything, people don't want to attend. And now I also mentioned to Solange, we shouldn't take it personally because you could be the best instructor in the world. Some students are so slammed and so stressed out because of the state of the world now that Maybe they don't want to jump onto another Zoom. And that's why I'm saying, let's make our version of our teaching more 2.0, and let's make it more interactive and immersive in nature. And lastly, these factors that affect which of these we use. If we want more flexibility for ourselves and for our students, maybe we go more with the discussion boards because they're not in real time. If we want more direct pedagogical approaches that focus on real-time learning, I want to show you how to use a mixing console, or I want to show you how to use Photoshop. And the only way to do that is either live Zoom with a screen share like this, or maybe a pre-recorded video. Nonetheless, I'm using video to express to you how to learn Photoshop. So the pace of learning, the type of technology available, like with VR headsets, if some students don't have them, that's not fair then to do an activity and those students are left behind. So what's tricky about all this is, again, synchronous versus asynchronous does not mean good, better, or best. It also doesn't mean that all of these approaches are going to be appropriate for your class, because you might have a particular style or approach to content, or you might have students who are like, Solange, please, more of the tutorials on Photoshop, or Eric, please, more real-time examples of your great videos on econ, and less of something else, handouts, whatever, right? You adapt often on the fly, so some of this may change over time. So that's thanks for letting me indulge. I geek out on these charts because it's kind of how I sometimes think through the world. Let me move along and we'll get to our own example. So real quick, I want to say, yeah, go ahead, Solange.
Okay, who decides? Who decides if your class is synchronous or asynchronous?
You do.
No, because the class I have is asynchronous, and it should never have been. It should be synchronous. I teach digital media, which is hands-on with Photoshop and audio and visual and text and graphic design. It should be a synchronous class or a classroom class. But why? Who decided that it's going to be asynchronous?
Well, kind of to step back to that, and I was in a meeting today. They said they're moving a few more classes potentially to face-to-face or EVE or hybrid even, half on campus, half online for spring, but that could all go out the door if COVID becomes worse in winter and we don't have a vaccine. But to answer your question, there's some rhyme and reason behind it, but in all honesty, in some cases, we will say we need one section of Intro to Soc face-to-face in a given year. Let's put it winter quarter 6 to 10. It's sometimes a little random, and then we find an instructor. In the case of what we're doing now because of COVID, it is really like, let's put most things online. We'll give the EVE designation, but in all honesty, if you teach a class that says DE in the schedule, it doesn't say EVE. As I said on Tuesday, if you want to, you could do an hour Zoom session every week. Some of my colleagues in social science do that. Even though it says DE, they maybe don't want to do the asynchronous discussion boards. So instead of doing those, they do an hour weekly Zoom. Now, the asterisk is you can't really require that because students didn't sign up thinking they would have to attend your class in real time on Zoom. So what you do to deal with that is you do the Zoom, but then you give them option B. Option A, attend my 1 hour Zoom on Photoshop. Option B, if you can attend, watch my video of it and do a discussion board post. So to answer your question, you could do as much Zoom as you want in your class, provided that you don't require it or that you give a makeup option to any of those students who might miss.
Yeah, I'm doing 2 hour-and-a-half Zoom meetings a week with both classes. Yesterday, I had 0 students out of 20 show up. So I did my lesson and posted it because it's something they're going to require to be able to do the assignments, which was, kind of weird. But regarding what Solange was saying, I feel the same way about public speaking. To not have public speaking be synchronous is really challenging. I'm finishing up a round of speeches, and I'll only have 18 students, and I offered afternoon and evening options on 6 different days, and I've only had 18 out of 30 students complete the speech, and if they're not going to do the speeches, they're not going to pass the class.
Wow. Yeah.
And your public speaking class is asynchronous.
It is.
See, that doesn't make sense. Did you decide that? Did you
No,
make?
of course
Okay,
not.
who decided that?
No, it was decided again. There's not like a magic. Unfortunately, and I don't mean anything bad by this. I mean, administration said we're going to try to put these classes DE, these EVE, these hybrid. Usually hybrid will be something like an EMT, something that has a license requirement that says you got to work with CPR compression dummies, or you got to do the radiology or the dental stuff in a chair with masks and social distancing. But for a lot of the classes, it was, I don't want to say random, but there wasn't like, a guide to which classes should go DE versus EVE. But as Eric said, he's totally correct. If you want to do Zoom in your DE class, go for it. Just have a plan B, because we can't really require it since the students didn't see in the schedule. It's meeting virtually every week from such and such time.
What is the advantage of asynchronous classes?
Real clear advantage. We can, go through these later, but let me show you a couple of these because I think they're really good to look at. Yeah, you go ahead, Eric. Yeah.
Don't appreciate me scheduling Zoom lessons is they want to be able to work on the class like they have in the past at their own schedule, period.
Yes.
And they don't want to have to conform to any other schedule. And they were couple of students were aggravated that I even was venturing to schedule. And I had to tell them, well, the policy's changing. We're being encouraged to do more face-to-face relationship teaching instruction with our students. And some students dropped on that account.
Yeah, that Eric hit one of the key ones. I've said this for years. I think number one for asynchronous for so many of our students, this is before COVID, is flexibility. You're a single parent, you're working 8 to 5, kids are in childcare, you get home at dinner time, you got to play with the kids, make them dinner, you don't have a partner to help you out, and the only time you could do your class is from 8 to 9 when the kids are in bed or something like that. So it's flexibility. I hope that never goes away, even after COVID, because we get so many students because we don't have traditional students. So that's the number one reason. There are some others as well where you can work at your own pace, and that is good for your calendar, but also just good for learning. One of the nice things about having any video, if someone is watching any kind of tutorial video on, I'm trying to see if I have one here. Well, yeah, any of my videos here on FERPA or whatever. If someone is watching that, they can start and stop the video where they want, right? They don't have to just like soak it all in real time in a Zoom session. So that's another definite advantage. For you, there are advantages. It's reducing repetitive work because Canvas will grade your quizzes, at least, and exams, the multiple choice stuff, the true false, the matching. It saves you some time and some repetition. And we've heard from faculty that they don't like a lot of repetition in dull work. They want to engage students. They don't want to spend dull time grading multiple choice exams. So those are some definite advantages. So Solange, what I would say to you is if you want to do more of that, you could go like in week 7 as an experiment just to try it out. You could do what Eric is doing now. Again, 0 out of 18 attending. That's kind of sad, but you could try to do a live Zoom and then say to your students, instead of doing those discussions for the week, whatever those amount to, you could do the one live Zoom with me, and I'll go into your discussion board and put the points full credit because you did the live Zoom with me in week 7 or something like that.
Right, as opposed to discussing.
Yeah, you could try that. The only rule I think that ever the administration would say you can't do a live Zoom in a DE is if you require it and then there isn't a makeup option. And the honest truth is, even in an EVE class, we've been told by the administration that, look, we know it says in the schedule it's EVE and they're doing live Zoom Tuesday, Thursday, 1 to 2. Well, what about COVID, taking care of a loved one? People are sick. People are having work schedules that are up in the air. So please try to be empathetic and focus on a makeup. So I would say regardless of what mode you're teaching in, you think about a makeup. I always used to do it when we had giant snow days. One year, the snow was so bad I barely made it to campus. And I said to my students, if anyone comes in late, or doesn't make it, you're all going to get to do a makeup because there's no way. And all of them made it. I was amazed. The roads were that bad. So We make accommodations when it's legit. And during COVID, I would say it's pretty legit.
Yeah.
Mr. Flexible here, I'll tell you what.
Well, you're a trooper for doing now. So you still, even though zero showed up, you still did the recording, right? So you have that? Yeah, that's great.
15 minutes, I realized
Yeah.
I didn't turn my microphone on. Had to start over because
Yeah.
I would have had a student out there saying, "Hey, we can't hear you,"
Yeah.
but I didn't. So I didn't have this mic switched on down there. So
Yeah. Cool.
great.
Well, I was going to mention, and then we'll get to the Q&A here. I know we've covered a lot, but again, I just want to say like synchronous versus asynchronous. We can't really say who decides what to use. You decide, kind of like my example of different forms of art here, or representation. One of these is not better than another. If you want to think about a painting of a horse versus photography versus one of those chrono photographs, those little flip card books in the 1840s, Muybridge more 1880s, his famous The Horse in Motion. It's a horse moving. And then we get a video of a horse. And there's even, I found it last night, a VR game that puts you in the saddle. You can pretend you're riding a horse and you could physically ride a horse. None of these, if you love horses, I'm not a horse person, but it came up because I was thinking about Muybridge last night. The Muybridge chrono photos are amazing. Like I love seeing those in, old museums or Ripley's, those kinds of technology. It's so cool to work with authentic or nostalgic technology of various sorts. And it's not to say that one of these is better than the other. They're different. They each tell a story in some way. And I say that because when we think about synchronous versus asynchronous, we shouldn't necessarily think about the fact that one is better than the other. And one thing I want to mention, if you've ever heard the joke or the idea that you had to be there, the idiom, someone tells you a joke and they don't laugh when you retell it, and you say, well, you had to be there. What that's saying is you're missing the fact that you're not there. So, right, like you didn't attend, just like the asynchronous version of this in a class, and therefore you didn't get it. And it's what we call presence, the idea of existing or being present in a place or thing. So even though we're saying that, one is not good or bad, there is this thing called presence out there. And some of us are talking about telepresence, the idea of achieving this state of existing or being present in a place, but through technology. And so my earlier example, unintended, but it came up in our conversation about a virtual comedian and a virtual audience, is a great example of telepresence, because that pressure to tell a joke in public, I can tell you, having performed hundreds of times in public and bands and as a soloist and stuff, it's really hard, doing something in a practice room versus going on stage and having a lot of people stare at you and you feeling all that pressure. So that telepresence is something we can imagine creating in Zoom or some other kind of setting. And as an example of this, I took this class back in the 90s, graduate course in music at the University of Iowa, and it was a very cool class. Late composer Robert Paredes, an experimental composer, and he taught this class heavy quarter, and it was a multimedia improvisation class. We literally went into his attic and we created these musical dramas and these improvisations, and they were super experimental. But his whole approach was more in line with the 1960s stuff, if you know Yoko Ono's involvement in Fluxus. The whole Fluxus movement was trying to get away from this idea that a song or a performance existed as a tab or a transcription or an archive on a disc or record, and instead was something that happened in real time and maybe never happened ever again. It faded into reality like a Navajo sand painting. And so his idea behind this class was that we achieved kind of this sense of presence by participating in live improvisations over a 3-hour time. And it was truly one of the most mind-blowing, maybe the best class, I've ever had. And I wasn't majoring in music at the time, but I took it because I knew this was going to be the kind of class that I could really use in terms of just my interest in anthropology. So that idea of presence, I think, is key. Just to kind of close some of this out, this article I passed out, this moment is prime for asynchronous learning. To go back to what Eric said earlier, a lot of people are arguing that asynchronous is better because the non-traditional students want the flexibility, and during COVID, even if we do live Zoom, we always have to do an accommodation and make sure that the student can make up that work. So again, make your judgment call, but keep that in the back of your mind that you might have to adapt and adjust on the fly. We were going to do the pros and cons, so maybe we could just talk about what we are using in terms of, our own examples with synchronous versus asynchronous. Will you change anything as a result of talking about it a little bit today? Will you keep it the same? Will you do a mix of both? What's your plan?
To know that what I'm doing is acceptable, that was encouraging. Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, I have a synchronous meeting in less than a minute. So
go for it.
I wanted it, but I also would like to talk to you about something else. I didn't get this, more of a personal question about one of my classes.
Send me an email, Eric. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. So I don't know. Yeah, Solange, are you thinking of doing any other? Will you try that Zoom out, you think, later this quarter, or?
Yes, I think that doing do you call it a Zoom out? Is that what you called it?
It's a, just a Zoom, a live Zoom session, I guess. Yeah.
Right. I believe that would be very beneficial for the students because they can always go to YouTube for the same tutorial. But I think that if I offer it on a class level for the students to have that ability to interact and ask questions, which you cannot do on YouTube, and to work with the students in a live situation would be extremely advantageous. And then I would right now I'm going to take a poll on what time is good for students, and then I'm also offering live one-on-one office hours as well. So I think I will be using the live Zoom for presentations of like Photoshop and Glyph and GIMP and all the other.
I think it's great. I've struggled with Photoshop in the past. It's not intuitive. You get into layers and some of the menus. I mean, I think it'd be very useful. And then you could see in the moment, to go back to the value of that synchronous form of learning, students get immediate feedback. And you get feedback and they say, hey, more on this and less on this. So I think you should at least try it out. And based on what you said in our Tuesday workshop, I was really rethinking how I do office hours. And I thought, maybe I will add points or something in the future, because I have that same struggle, like with you and Erica. Students aren't showing up. How can we incentivize that a little bit more just to get students to attend? So that's a good conversation. Yeah, see? Yeah. So I'm thinking we could give some incentive out there, to say if you didn't do so well, maybe you get a couple bonus points or something just to get them in the door.
I don't know if they're not showing because they can't, because they have work schedules or other classes. I don't know what their reasons for not showing is. Yeah. I did reach out to 2 students and asked them specifically to join me, and neither of them did. Neither of them replied.
You know what I might do? Do an anonymous poll. Don't track who it is, and just put it in Canvas and say, hey, I'm offering office hours, what's your reason for not attending? And list some of those and see what people say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I could do that.
Yeah.
I could do that in discussions, actually.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, I think we'll call it to a close here. Again, thank you all for attending today. We'll do more of these. Certainly, again, we're dark next week, so nothing is happening next week. You can still reach out to me. I'll be pretty swamped between ISPs, so I will probably pass on a lot of that to Treva. So any Canvas technology stuff, maybe hit Treva up next week. I'm sure she's busy too, but my accreditation is going to probably get the best of me. So yeah, that's it for today. I will make this available as a recording too for people who missed today. And I thank you all for participating in the workshop today. It's been wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, take care, everyone.